One big difference between MATLAB and Python is that in Python, there are many more data types than there are in MATLAB. So for example, one of the more unusual data types we've looked at is range. So for example, we can do like range go from 1 to 100, go up by 3. And if we evaluate something like this, we don't really see any extra information. Like all that DeepNote prints out is the exact same thing I typed in. So let me copy this and let me save it with R, how about, for range? And to really see how this works, like one way to get a sense for what's inside of this object R is to convert it to a list. So for example, I can wrap it inside of this word list. And then I see explicitly what the numbers are in this. So you can see also that it doesn't include this 100 at the end. It goes up by 3, starts at 1, and it ends at 97 instead of at 100. And so why does Python have like two different objects for this? Like, how come if I check what's the type of R, how come that's a range object and not also a list? Well, let me show you one example, and then in a following video, we'll talk about speed of operations, which is another example. But let's import the library sys for system. And then let's check sys.getSizeOf R. And this is going to tell me how much space does this object take up in the computer in terms of bytes. So it takes up 48 bytes, whatever that means. And now let's check what's the size of list R. So you can see that that's much larger. Hey, it's 48 versus 416 bytes. And if I were to do, how about R2 equals range 10 to the 7th? And I do, how about L2 equals list R2. Okay, so that's going to be the same numbers in a sense, but this L2 is going to be a list, R2 is going to be a range. And if I do sys.getSizeOf for R2, see, it's the exact same size as the previous one, 48. And that won't always happen, but in this case, it's the exact same. Whereas if I do sys.getSizeOf for L2, and then, and I can't even read what this number is. Maybe it's 90 million bytes. So it's a huge difference. So there is one reason that we shouldn't just automatically convert everything into a list. So are ranges always better than lists? Like in this sense, in terms of size, ranges are better than lists, but they definitely aren't. Like for example, if I do my list equals 31415, okay, so if I check what's the type of that, okay, I get that that's a list. And the reason it's a list is because I made it using these square brackets here, which tells Python that that's going to be a list, or I want it to be a list. And so let's try to convert this into a range object and see what happens. Say I do range of my list. And that type of thing doesn't work. So I was able to convert from a range object to a list, but I can't convert from a list to a range object. And one reason for that is range objects are much more regular than lists. Hey, like here, there isn't some nice pattern, like start at 1, go up to 100, go up by 3. Hey, here it's just some random numbers. So that's one advantage of range over list is ranges tend to take up much less size. One advantage of lists over range objects is that lists are much more flexible. And you can also like change lists more easily. Like if you do my list dot append 13, okay, that works fine. And now if I check this, you can see that now there's a 13 at the end. Whereas if you do, let's see, does R still exist? So if I try to do r.append 13, I'll get some error. So another example I want to go over is sets. So if I try to convert, how about R into a set? It's going to look exactly the same as when I made it into a list. Only difference is that here there are these curly braces on the outside. And let me do one other example. Okay, I don't know why this this comment is showing up saying this cell has been executed. It just seems like some little bug temporarily in DeepNote. But let's go back to my list and let's try to convert that into a set. So one thing to notice is it seems like it's ordered the elements in this. Like, let's call it, how about my set? And then if I display my set, it seems like it's ordered the elements. So let's try. Okay, like let's try to see what's the 0th element in my set. And so this is one difference between sets and lists. Lists have a notion of order, but sets do not. If you've taken Math 13, it's the same in Math 13, that something like a set or a set in Math 13 in the Intro to Proof class, that does not have a notion of order. Okay, same in Python. Another difference is that if you look back at my list, it had these two different ones in it, but my set only has a single one in it. So that is another difference, and that's another similarity with the mathematical concept of set, is that in mathematics, sets do not have repetitions. So that is some difference between set, the data type in Python, and list, the data type in Python. Some similarity between them is I can say like 3 in my list. So this is asking, is the integer 3 in my list? I can say, is 3 in my set? And so I'm getting these Boolean values of true. I can also say 3 in range 100. Let's go up by 2 this time, so that 3 is going to be in there. And there I get true. So seeing just an example of these very similar looking data types, but seeing a little bit of the differences and similarities between them for set, for range, and for list. Another one I wanted to mention is tuple, and this often shows up, for example, as the output to some function. Like, let me show you an example. Say you import pandas as PD, and say you make a data frame df equals pd.dataframe. And then I'll make it from a dictionary, another data type in Python. And let's say A is going to be range 5. And let's say B is going to be range, well, if I try 6, I'm going to get an error because these two things have different lengths. But how about range 0, go up to 10, go up by 2. Okay, now if I look at df, okay, here it's these 2 columns, each with 5 elements in it. And let's call this, how about s for shape equals df.shape. And if I check what does s look like, I get this 5, 2 inside round parentheses. And so 5, that is for the number of rows. 2, it's for the number of columns. But the reason I'm talking about this here in this video is that this s, it's yet another data type in Python. So if I check what's the type of s, okay, it's something called a tuple. And it's really hard to see, like, what's the advantage of that over the list version of this? I mean, a way you can visually see the difference is that these round parentheses for tuple versus these square brackets for list. But what does that have to do with how the data actually works? Let me just show you one example of how these are different. So let me try to, let's see, S is this tuple. And let's call this, how about new list is the list version of S. Okay, so new list, it's the same numbers in the same order, but it's the list version. And let's try to put these into a set. So I can say like 3, 5, new list. Okay, here I get an error, and let's not worry about what unhashable means, but it's, in this case, it's saying you're not allowed to put new list into a set. On the other hand, let's try to put the tuple s into the set, 3, 5, s. Okay, and then there this works. So what's one advantage of a tuple over a list? One advantage is that you can put tuples into a set, whereas you can't put lists into a set. I think the last similar data type I want to show is from NumPy. So let's import NumPy as NP. And let's see, does my list still exist? Yep, there's my list. And if I want to convert this into the NumPy version of a list, which is called an array, I can wrap this inside of np.array, my list. And again, like with all of these, like when you just see them displayed, it's hard to tell what the advantage or disadvantage is. Here it looks exactly like the same list. It's just there's also this word array on the outside. Okay, let me call this my array. And we can ask things like true or false, is 3 in my array? And we can ask something like, is 2 in my array? And this one will be false. So in that sense, it's similar to list. We can ask what's the second element in my array, just like we could for a list. And that gets me this number 4, the 0th, 1st, 2nd. But arrays have all sorts of extra methods that lists don't have. So for example, I can say like, myArray.shape, just like I did for the pandas array. And this is actually a little length 1 tuple, okay, starting with 6, but with just one number in it. Okay, whereas if I were to try to do that with list, I get this error that says list object has no attribute shape. So to really appreciate the difference between these different data types, like range, list, set, tuple, and NumPy array, to really appreciate the difference, you need to see how long different operations take to perform with these different data types. And we'll look at that in a subsequent video. Okay, that's all I'll say. Thanks for watching.